Oklahoma's got an interesting quarterback situation developing. We'll talk about that and much more on today's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. My name is John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. My buddy here is at Josh Helmer. You can also, at Josh on Ref. Completely blanked on the Twitter handle. My apologies. You can also hear him Monday through Friday from 9 to noon on the KREF Sports app. And Josh, kind of one of the bigger discussion points over the last few days has been about the quarterback positions in regard to whether or not they're planning to play Jackson Arnold. We heard from Brent Venables in the post game after the win over West Virginia that they'd like to preserve that red shirt if possible for Jackson Arnold. And then on Tuesday, we heard from Brent Venables on Dillon Gabriel that they haven't really had substantive talks about his future. He is eligible for one more season with the Oklahoma Sooners. So what do you make of Oklahoma's quarterback situation? First of all, let's talk Dillon Gabriel. It seemed back at OU Media Day, Jeff Lebby kind of poo-pooed the idea that Dillon Gabriel would come back for a sixth season, but we saw that Quinn Ewers is going to be back for another year, even when most people projected him to be, a top 100 pick in the NFL draft. Could Dillon Gabriel also surprise and return?
It's interesting. I'm going to bank on no, but let's start here. Let's revisit the August 29th quote from Brent Venables. Quote, "There's no doubt that Dillon is our undisputed quarterback for all the reasons that you all know, but we know that Dillon won't be here next year. So we've got to prepare for that day as well. Like all those decisions, you've got to have a plan for that, and we do." End quote. Okay, that was August 29th. That's before the season. We fast forward to today. Curtis Fitzpatrick asks, is there an option where Dillon Gabriel returns to play for you? And the response today from Brent Venables, quote, "We haven't had those conversations. He's played a lot of college football. He's overcome a lot of injuries and ailments. We haven't talked about that, though." End quote. So, and he had this to say, too. I think a year ago, maybe the talk was he had a good year. Why would you want to come back when you could come back and have a bad year? But what's he done? He's come back and had an even better year. End quote. So I guess the question, what do you make of all of this?
It seemed like the prevailing thought was that Dillon Gabriel was going to play this year and then try his hand at the NFL, probably be a late round draft pick at best. I would imagine 4th, 5th rounder later, somebody takes a flyer on him. But given the year that he's had this year, where he's put himself at least on the fringe of the Heisman consideration, he's really raised his platform. He's raised his profile. I mean, he's been the best version of himself that he's ever been. I mean, he just set a record for touchdowns in a game at Oklahoma, passed Colt Brennan in career passing yards. He's completing passes at a much higher rate than he's ever completed them. So and he's running the ball really, really well, showing off a totally different element to his game than he has in years past. It just all kind of seems to be coming together for him. And still, I don't necessarily see him as somebody who's a top 100 pick in the NFL draft. He's not somebody who, NFL draft evaluators are looking at and saying, hey, that's a franchise quarterback. At the same time, we're seeing a guy like Brock Purdy, who was the last pick of the 2022 NFL draft, right now leading the NFL in almost every statistical category. Maybe not passing yards, but completion percentage and QBR and all these things. There's potential that Dillon Gabriel could, benefit from another year of college football, just that experience, and then come out eventually and be a guy that is ready to roll. I'll say what I said on Twitter earlier today. For your first year in the SEC, I would not mind at all having an experienced quarterback leading the way. We know Jackson Arnold is incredibly talented. He's a very, very good player. He's got all the tools in the toolbox, could be one of the best to ever play at Oklahoma. That's the potential that he has. At the same time, we're talking about Alabama and Tennessee and Ole Miss and Auburn and a better Missouri team and obviously Texas. That schedule is going to be really daunting. And that's not to say that Jackson Arnold's not capable of doing it, but would you feel a little bit more comfortable going into those games with a more experienced quarterback? I know a lot of people in the comments are going to disagree with that premise, but having an experienced guy who's played a ton of college football at the helm for these big time matchups, I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea.
Well, where we exist today, I would agree and say that it's not going to hurt my feelings at all if Dillon Gabriel's back in Norman next season. Now, I would echo what I've sort of the initial response was to us on the radio side. John, it was, okay, hey, that's great. Would love to have Dillon Gabriel back. From some, right? I mean, there was, of course, the opposite response, which was, no, move on. It's Jackson Arnold time. We don't want to scare off Jackson Arnold. But for those, a couple of them that said, yes, we welcome Dillon Gabriel back with open arms, it's welcome him back, but it is an open competition. When the spring hits into the fall, there's not this idea that Dillon Gabriel is this unquestioned starter for Oklahoma. And I would agree with that angle to it as well, if indeed that comes to pass for OU. I mean, I think that you don't just sit there and say, okay, you make the decision to come back. Well, we're going to stash this plan away for Jackson Arnold to start. If he's the better option and he proves that over the course of this next offseason, assuming that scenario comes to pass, then to me, Jackson Arnold's the guy that needs to start for Oklahoma. But I think a lot of this will be steeped in what Brent Venables knows and the moves that happen. You know, if this winds up where Jeff Lebby takes a different job, a head coaching job, then okay, does Dillon Gabriel follow him? Does Jackson Arnold follow him? And I think a lot of that could be where the answers to all of this happens in regards to Dillon Gabriel coming back and playing for Oklahoma or not. The redshirt thing, that's kind of interesting with Jackson Arnold. I'm not crazy about it. To be honest with you, I've kind of made my stance on that pretty clear that to me anymore, a redshirt I don't think is super valuable for a guy like Jackson Arnold. For others, okay, it could be valuable. But I don't know that it's super valuable for Jackson Arnold, but that's the direction that Oklahoma's taken this thing with Jackson Arnold this season.
So a couple of people made the point over on Twitter, replying to some of the stuff that, you know, I put out there on the Locked On Sooners Twitter account, that it's the red shirt is kind of for the what if, you know, what if he's not as good as everybody thinks he's going to be? What if he gets hurt, you know, and you have that red shirt in your back pocket to kind of help to, you know, give him another year of eligibility, give him an opportunity to continue to build and develop. I don't know. I don't worry about Jackson Arnold leaving. I don't really worry about Dillon Gabriel leaving. The relationships are there. It goes, to me, it's beyond Jeff Lebby. And the idea of an open competition, I'm kind of not so keen on, because Baker Mayfield comes back and you're going to put him in an open competition with Kyler Murray. Probably not. Baker Mayfield's your guy. Kyler Murray just has to sit another year, and then he gets his turn. That's just kind of the way it works, right? Jalen Hurts, he's your guy. Spencer Rattler, you're going to have to sit a year and watch Jalen Hurts play quarterback. Now with Jackson Arnold, he got to sit his true freshman year, going to get to sit a redshirt freshman year, potentially if Dillon Gabriel returns, and then you'll be the guy. So, you know, we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it all plays out and transpires. It's going to be fascinating to follow this offseason to see what Dillon Gabriel decides to do. If Jeff Lebby gets a head coaching interview or job somewhere else, how that impacts Jackson Arnold, Michael Hawkins, you know, Brennan Zerberg, Kevin Sperry, all these guys in the recruiting class. Well, it's just going to be, the offseason is almost as fun as the actual football season anymore. What's not fun is rule clarifications. And we're going to talk about what the Big 12 is trying to do, or did, on Tuesday, coming up next.
Score early or late this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, or right smack dab in the middle of NFL season. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your moneyline bet wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action than right now. The app, of course, is so easy to use, wide range of betting options, including but not limited to spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and get involved this NFL season. Oh, by the way, if you're curious, what is that number? What's it look like for the Sooners this week out in Provo? It's a healthy number, right? I mean, this is a BYU team that's not playing all that great. I told John yesterday, I honestly, right now, I like Oklahoma, even all those points, minus 24.5, the over-under 56.5. So that's what the number looks like for Oklahoma BYU at this moment in time. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL.
Okay, Josh. So the tiebreaker scenarios, everything that goes into the computer and the database and the algorithm, that gives me tired head. But what gives me more tired head is the Big 12 not having a clear understanding of their tiebreaker rules. Do you want to walk everybody through what the rule understanding was and what the Big 12 came out and clarified today?
Yeah, essentially, because Oklahoma and Kansas State did not play each other, as currently written, it would mean that Oklahoma State's head-to-head wins over OU and K-State would be thrown out as the conference moves to the next tiebreak scenario, which would then go record against the next highest placed common opponent in the standings based on record in all games played within the conference proceeding through the standings. So basically that head-to-head component would get thrown out because in the league's current state with 14 teams, everybody can't play everybody, right? So the fact that Oklahoma State had both Oklahoma and Kansas State on their schedule, well, OU and Kansas State didn't have each other on their schedule. So there was a scenario in play where all of those teams wound up, obviously, with a 7-2 conference record. And there was a scenario where Oklahoma, despite the fact that they lost Bedlam, and that Oklahoma State, despite the fact that they won Bedlam and beat Kansas State, would not go to the Big 12 championship over, would not go to the Big 12 championship over OU and Kansas State. Well, basically, the Big 12 came back today to say, yeah, that's not going to be how this thing's going to work out. Monday, the Big 12 source said that the communication caused further discussion in the conference office, leading to a clarification, which is scheduled to be presented to the Big 12 athletic directors in a conference call Wednesday, which sounds like basically the scenario is going to go back to Oklahoma State under that instance. They will go with the head-to-head tiebreaker, even though that was not how the tiebreaker was the language was written in the offseason.
Yeah, it sounded like somebody needed a better editor as they finalize their rules, but it just reeks of, whoops, our bad, guys. This is really what we meant to say. And it makes sense. It does. I'm not going to sit here and say it doesn't make sense in a situation in which Oklahoma State and Kansas State are all tied, and you're trying to pick one team to go to the Big 12 title game out of those three. It makes sense that Oklahoma State should go 100% of the time. It's just frustrating that maybe it's more frustrating for the people that have spent hours just trying to, get through the muck of the Big 12 tiebreaker scenarios to come up with all this. And now it's all for naught. But maybe it's frustrating also that, okay, things have presumably changed or perceivably changed. And it just is another bullet in the chamber for those that believe in the Big 12 conspiracy. There's definitely no good feelings, good positive vibes from the Big 12 towards Oklahoma and Texas. But I don't think that they would have used a tiebreaker situation to try and keep Oklahoma out, if that makes sense. So it's weird. It's irritating a little bit to see that things are not maybe more favorable for Oklahoma as they head into the final 2 weeks. But as many people have said, you win the games against Oklahoma State and Kansas, which were 100% winnable games, and you're not having this conversation. You win just one of those two games and we're not having this conversation. So it's again, Oklahoma has to take care of business. They got to be in control. But I also understand the frustration that the Big 12 doesn't have their act together. And here it is coming to hurt Oklahoma, basically.
Yeah, it's easy to understand why Oklahoma fans are going to feel like there's a vendetta against the Sooners from the league office, and that this was clearly clarified and reconstructed in order to not benefit Oklahoma. But it is what it is. I guess my takeaway is similar to yours. It's frustrating that it plays out this way, that the language wasn't written better to begin with. It does feel like there's an axe to grind against Oklahoma here. And yet I think my response is don't lose Bedlam. Don't allow this situation to happen. And I know that now you got, okay, well, what about the Drake Stoops pass interference? Maybe they don't lose Bedlam if that happens. Well, that's true. But if you can operate a couple of snaps, you don't lose Bedlam, right? If you don't go uber conservative late versus Kansas, you're not in this position. So as frustrating, I guess, as it is from the league office, Oklahoma has itself to blame that this maybe is going to be how this thing plays out for Oklahoma. And yet there is still a path in, right? If Texas loses to Iowa State, or if Oklahoma State decides that they're going to cough another one up this week versus Houston, and you take care of business, okay, there's going to be a path forward for Oklahoma in. So this is not a total death nail in the coffin for OU, but it eliminates one path to the Big 12 championship. And again, it stinks. It wasn't handled very well by the Big 12 conference. I do think there's a bone to pick. I think that's pretty obvious from the Big 12 offices against Oklahoma. I don't think you do this otherwise in season. But then again, I do feel like Oklahoma is culpable, right? In just not playing better football.
Yeah, exactly. And you're never going to make every fan base happy. And if they would have kept things the way they were, and Kansas State and Oklahoma made the Big 12 title game and Oklahoma State got left out, there'd be a whole different fan base really irritated about the way things played out. So I totally get that. Okay, maybe you wrote it wrong, but it's the thing that does make sense. You just wish it wouldn't have happened 2 weeks before, the Big 12 or the end of the regular season, 3 weeks before the Big 12 title game, as everybody's trying to figure things out. I can just tell you though, that if Texas is in it or Oklahoma's in it, there's going to be a lot of SEC chants that rain down upon Brett Yormark, and maybe even upon Nelly at halftime when he's trying to perform, country grammar. We'll see, but it's going to be interesting to see what the final explanation is from the Big 12, and we'll talk more about that when it comes down as well. But yeah, man, let's get ready for BYU. We're going to talk with our man Jacob C. Hatch to get you ready for that. We'll have our show with him on Thursday, Locked On BYU, to give you the Cougars' perspective of this game, and he'll talk a little bit about where things have gone wrong for the Cougars over the last few weeks as well. But we'll talk more about BYU, start getting ready for that matchup here after the break. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. So, Josh, BYU, the Cougars, struggling a little bit of late, especially on the defensive, well, really on both sides of the football, but they're giving up a lot of points. They're not really, doing much offensively. Obviously, Keaton Slovis has been out. That's going to be a big time storyline to watch as we head into Saturday, his availability. So what are you thinking about BYU? How are you feeling about the Oklahoma Sooners heading into this matchup?
So first off, this is kind of interesting. Did you know that BYU football didn't practice on Monday?
No.
So they had their civic engagement day which is a new NCAA requirement that needs to fall on a non-operations day within 15 days of election day. And anyways, Monday was the day that they chose to do that. So just kind of an interesting little angle to this football game, but it might be a reset for BYU. I mean, maybe that's the exact thing that they needed, right? Was to get out of the football offices, take one extra day, think about something that really isn't football related, because this is a BYU team that comes in playing very poor football. It is what it is, right? Offensively, defensively, they've really, really struggled the last month of the season. I do, see the scenario where, big time underdog. We talked about it. Let's just round up and call it a 4-touchdown dog, 4-score dog in this game for BYU. They're desperate, right, to try and salvage this season late. It's at home. It's a weird scheduled game. It's going to wind up the earliest recorded kickoff time in Oklahoma football history, John. Now, there might have been one that was actually sooner than 10:07 Mountain Time, but in terms of the recorded Oklahoma football history, what we definitively know in terms of a kickoff time, this will be the earliest ever kickoff time. So there's some like weird at play, I guess, is what I'm getting at here, maybe for Oklahoma in the mountains. So I expect a desperate BYU to an extent, but I just don't think they're good enough to keep this thing close, John.
No, and they're going to be a tough team. They might give you a bit of a test early on in this game. It's just going to be up to you to survive it, take care of the football, not hurt yourself, and then eventually let your talent gap that you're the much more talented team, let that take over as the second, third, fourth quarter go on, because BYU's depth is really hurting and you've got a lot of really good depth. Now, again, they're a tough team. They got a tough coach, physical. They're going to test you. Just take care of the football, play tough, be ready to go for 4 quarters. And if you play with that same intensity that we saw this past week, it should be Oklahoma by a lot in this one. And I think, the odds makers are seeing this one probably pretty clearly. It's just kind of surprising. I think we looked at this game in the preseason, and for a lot of people, myself included, this was the one we had circled as maybe the toughest test outside of Texas, when the season was beginning. But then the season went along and things drastically changed. West Virginia was better. Oklahoma State was better than what we thought they were going to be. BYU has turned out to be, okay, maybe not great, but still you thought maybe just going to Provo was going to provide a challenge. And still you're going to be up in the mountains at elevation, playing at a weird time, 10 a.m. It's all just a little bit weird, but BYU is so poor right now. They're playing so bad right now that if you don't go in there and you don't win by 2 to 3 touchdowns, it'll feel a bit like a disappointment. But at this point in the season, just go win. That's the only thing that matters. Get the dub, get out of there, get back to Oklahoma, and start getting ready for TCU on a short week.
It might be a little dramatic to say this, but I do feel this way to some degree, and especially for this week versus BYU. If Oklahoma loses this game, it turns this season into what's going to feel like a failure in a lot of ways for OU. And I feel that way for Black Friday versus TCU for Oklahoma too. I mean, given what these teams have turned out to be, John, Oklahoma has to win these next 2 games. Yes, probably they need to do so convincingly to really make us feel good, but just win. Like you said, you can't lose one of these games, given the way these 2 teams' seasons have played out, who they've been, the fact that TCU is at home for Oklahoma next week on Black Friday. In order for this to feel like legitimate progress has been made here at the end of the season, Oklahoma just has to do what Oklahoma needs to do, and that's take care of business this week and next.
That's right. It's one thing to lose to a Kansas team that's really, really well coached and showing that they're a program on the rise, or Oklahoma State in a rivalry game with a head coach that's a really good head coach and a really good running back and some really good defensive pieces. It's a totally different thing to lose to BYU or TCU. Those 2 teams are bottom 6 in the conference. They're 2 of the 6 worst teams in this conference. So they've got to go in there and absolutely win these games and finish the season strong. Again, we'll talk more BYU as the week goes along. Maybe not as the season goes along, because we want to be one and done with the Cougars. But no, we'll have Jacob C. Hatch. We'll do our Locked On crossover with him for Thursday, and then we'll give you our keys to the game for Friday, our picks as well. But follow Josh on Twitter at JoshOnRef, myself at John9Williams. The show is at Locked On Sooners. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all platforms and on YouTube. Hit that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. Until next time, he's Josh Helmer. I'm John Williams. Boomer Sooner.